Thank you for joining me. I'm going to carry on reading from Ralph Waldo Emerson's book called The Transcendentalist. It's about spiritual ideas which help one connect with God and connect with one's soul in a unique and beautiful plane and a beautiful way. Please leave your thoughts, your feedback, your comments in the comment section down below. I appreciate it. What you think of the ideas I'm sharing, the book I'm reading. Does it resonate with you? Does my style of reading resonate with you? I want to hear about it. And if you don't mind, sharing in the comment section down below. And please subscribe if you haven't already to this amazing channel. I shall now continue. In the order of thought, the materialist takes his departure from the external world and esteems a man as one product of that. The idealist takes his departure from his consciousness and reckons the world an appearance. The materialist respects sensible masses, society, government, social art, and luxury. Every establishment, every mass, whether majority of numbers or extent of space or amount of objects, every social action. The idealist has another measure, which is metaphysical, namely the rank, which things themselves take in his consciousness, not at all the size or appearance. Mind is the only reality of which men and all their natures are better or worse reflectors. Nature, literature, history are only subjective phenomena. Although in his action, empowered by the laws of action, in so warmly cooperating with men, even preferring them to himself, yet when he speaks scientifically, or after the order of thought, he is constrained to degrade persons into representatives of truths. He does not respect labor, or the products of labor, namely property, otherwise than as manifold symbol, illustrating with wonderful fidelity of details the law of being. He does not respect government, except as far as it reiterates the law of his mind, nor the churches, nor charities, nor arts for themselves. But here's, as at a vast distance, what they say, as if his consciousness would speak to him through a pantomimic scene. His thought, that is the universe, his experience inclines him to behold the procession of facts you call the world, as flowing perpetually outward from an invisible, unsounded center in himself, center alike of him, and of them, and necessitating him to regard all things as having a subjective or relative existence, relative to that aforesaid unknown center of him. From this transfer of the world into consciousness, this beholding of all things in the world follow easily. I'll repeat that. From this transfer of the world into the consciousness, this beholding of all things in the mind follow easily his whole ethics. It is simpler to be self-dependent. The height, the deity of man, is to be self-sustained, to need no gift, no foreign force. Society is good when it does not violate me, but best when it is like is to solitude. Everything real is self-existent. Everything divine shares the self-existence of deity. All that you call the world is the shadow of that substance, which you are, the perpetual creation of the powers of thought, of those that you depend, of those that are dependent, and of those that are independent of your will. Do not cumber yourself with fruitless pains to mend and remedy remote effects. Let the soul be erect, and all things will go well. You think me, the child of my circumstances, I make my circumstances? Let any thought or motive of mine be different from that they are. The difference will transform my condition and economy. This thought which is called I, is the mold into which the world is poured poured like melted wax. The mold is invisible, but the world betrays the shape of the mold. You call the power of circumstance, but it is the power of me. Am I in harmony with myself? My position will seem to you just and commanding. Am I vicious and insane? My fortunes will seem to you obscure and descending. As I am, so shall I associate, and so shall I act. Caesar's history will paint out Caesar. Jesus acted so, because he thought so. I do not wish to overlook or to gainsay any reality. I say I make my circumstance. But if you ask me, whence am I feel like other men. My relation to the fact which cannot be spoken or denied for even thoughts, but which exists and will exist. The transcendentalist adopts the whole connection of spiritual doctrine. He believes in miracle, in the perpetual openness of the human mind to new influx of light and power. He believes in inspiration and in ecstasy. He wishes that the spiritual principle should be suffered to demonstrate itself to the end, in all possible applications to the state of man, without the admission of anything unspiritual. That is, anything positive, dogmatic, personal. Thus, the spiritual measure of inspiration is the depth of the thought and never who said it. And so, he resists all attempts to palm other rules and measures on the spirit than its own. In action, he easily incurs the charge of antinomianism by his avowal that he, who has the lawgiver, may with safety not only neglect but even contravene every written commandment in the play of Othello. The expiring Desdemona absolves her husband of the murder to her attendant Emilia. Afterwards, when Emilia charges him with the crime, Othello exclaims, quote, "You heard her say herself, it was not I." End quote. Emilia replies, quote, "The more angel she, and thou the blacker devil." End quote. Of this fine incident, Jacobi, the transcendental moralist, makes use with other parallel instances. In his reply to Fichte, Jacobi, refusing all measure of right and wrong except the determinations of the private spirit, remarks that there is no crime, but has sometimes been a virtue. Quote, "I," end quote, he says, "am that atheist, that godless person who, in opposition to an imaginary doctrine of calculation, would lie as the dying Desdemona lied, would lie and deceive as Pylades when he personated Orestes, would assimilate like Timoleon, would perjure myself like Epaminondas and John D. Witt. I would resolve on suicide like Cato. I would commit sacrilege with David, yea, and pluck ears of corn on the Sabbath, for no other reason than that I was fainting for lack of food. For I have assurance in myself that in pardoning these fruits according to the letter, man exerts a sovereign right which the majesty of his being confers on him. He sets the seal of his divine nature to the grace he accords." End quote. In like manner, if there is anything grand and endearing in human thought or virtue, any reliance on the vast, the unknown, any presentiment, any extravagance of faith, the spiritualist adopts it as most in nature. The Oriental mind has always tended to this largeness. Buddhism is an expression of it. The Buddhist who thanks no man, who says, quote, "Do not flatter your benefactors," end quote, but who in his conviction that every good deed can be no possibility escape its reward. I have to repeat that. But who in his conviction that every good deed can be no possibility escape its reward will not deceive the benefactor by pretending that he has done more than he should, is a transcendentalist. You will see by the sketch that there is no such thing as a transcendental party, that there is no pure transcendentalists, that we know of none but prophets and heralds of such a philosophy, that all who by strong bias of nature have learnt to the spiritual side in doctrine have stopped short of their goal. We have had many harbingers and forerunners, but of a purely spiritual life, history has afforded no example. I mean, we have yet no man who has leaned entirely on his character and eaten angel's food, who trusting to his sentiments found life made of miracles, who working for universal aims found himself fed. He knew not how, clothed, sheltered, and weaponed. He knew not how, and yet it was done by his own hands. Only in the instinct of the lower animals we find the suggestion of the methods of it, and something higher than our understanding. The squirrel hoards nuts, and the bee gathers honey, without knowing what they do, and they are thus provided for without selfishness or disgrace. Shall we say, then, that transcendentalism is the Saturnalia, or excess of faith, the presentiment of a faith proper to man in his integrity, excessive only when his imperfect obedience hinders the satisfaction of his wish? Nature is transcendental, exists primarily, necessarily, ever works and advances, yet takes no thought for the morrow. Man owns the dignity of the life which throbs around him, in chemistry and tree and animal, and in the involuntary functions of his own body. Yet he is balked when he tries to fling himself into the enchanted circle, where all is done without degradation, yet genius and virtue predict in man the same absence of private ends and of condensation to circumstances, united with every trait and talent of beauty and power. This way of thinking, falling on Roman times, made Stoic philosophies falling on despotic times, made patriot Catos and Brutuses falling on superstitious times, made prophets and apostoles on popish times, made Protestants and ascetic monks, preachers of faith against the preachers of works, on pre-lactical times, made Puritans and Quakers, and falling on Unitarian and commercial times, makes the peculiar shades of idealism which we know. It is well known to most of my audience that the idealism of the present day acquired the name of transcendental from the use of that term by Immanuel Kant of Königsberg, who replied to the skeptical philosophy of Locke, which insisted that there was nothing in the intellect which was not previously an experience of the senses, by showing that there was a very important class of ideas or imperative forms which did not come by experience, but thought which experience was acquired. That these were intuitions of the mind, and he dominated them transcendental forms, the extraordinary profoundness and precision of that man thinking have given vogue to his nomenclature in Europe and America, to that extent that whatever belongs to the class of intuitive thought is popularly called, at the present day, transcendental. Although, as we have said, there is no pure transcendentalist, yet the tendency to respect the intuitions and to give them, at least in our creed, all authority over our experience, has deeply colored the conversation and poetry of the present day, and the history of genius and of religion in these times. Though impure and as yet not incarnated in any powerful individual, will be the history of this tendency. It is a sign of our times, conspicuous to the coarsest observer, that many intellectual and religious persons withdraw themselves from the common labors and competitions of the market and the caucus, and betake themselves to a certain solitary and critical way of living, from which no solid fruit has yet appeared to justify their separation. They hold themselves aloof. They feel their disproportion between their faculties and the work offered to them, and they prefer to ramble in the country and perish of ennui to the degradation of such charities and such ambitions as the city can propose to them. They are striking work and crying out for somewhat worthy to do. What they do is done only because they are overpowered by the humanities that speak on all sides, and they consent to such labor as is open to them. Though to their lofty dream, the writing of Iliads or Hamlets or the building of cities or empires seems drudgery. Now, everyone must do after his kind, be he asp or angel, and these must. The question which a wise man and a student of modern history will ask is what that kind is. And truly, as an ecclesiastical history, we take so much pains to know what the Gnostics, what the Essenes, what the Manichees, and what the Reformers believed. It would not misbecome us to ignore nearer home what these companions and contemporaries of ours think and do, at least so far as these thoughts and actions appear to be not accidental and personal, but common to many, and the inevitable flower of the tree of time. Our American literature and spiritual history are, we confess, in the optative mood. But whoso knows these seething brains, these admirable radicals, these unsocial worshippers, these talkers who talk the sun and moon away, will believe that this heresy cannot pass away without leaving its mark. They are lonely. The spirit of the writing and conversation is lonely. They repel influences. They shun general society. They incline to shut themselves in their chamber in the house, to live in the country rather than in the town, and to find their tasks and amusements in solitude. Society, to be sure, does not like this very well. It saith, whoso goes to walk alone accuses the whole world. He declares all to be unfit to be his companions. It is very uncivil, nay, insulting. Society will retaliate. Meantime, this retirement does not proceed from any whim on the part of the separatists. But if anyone will take pains to talk with them, he will find that this part is chosen both from temperament and from principle, with some unwillingness too, and as a choice of the less of two evils. For these persons are not by nature melancholy, sour, and unsocial. They are not stockish or brute, but joyous, susceptible, affectionate. They have even more than others a great wish to be loved. Like the young Mozart, they are rather ready to cry 10 times a day. But are you sure you love me? Nay, if they tell you their whole thought, they will own that love seems to them the last and highest gift of nature. Yet there are persons whom in their hearts they daily thank for existing, persons whose faces are perhaps unknown to them, but whose fame and spirit have penetrated their solitude, and for whose sake they wish to exist, to behold the beauty of another character, which inspires a new interest in our own, to behold the beauty lodged in a human being with such vivacity of apprehension that I am instantly forced home to inquire if I am not deformity itself, to behold in another the expression of a love so high that it assures itself also to me against every possible casualty except my unworthiness. These are degrees on the scale of human happiness to which they have ascended, and it is a fidelity to the sentiment which has made common association distasteful to them. They wish a just and even fellowship or none. They cannot gossip with you, and they do not wish, as they are sincere and religious, to gratify any mere curiosity which you may entertain. Like fairies, they do not wish to be spoken of. Love me, they say, but do not ask who is my cousin and my uncle. If you do not need to hear my thought because you can read it in my face and behavior, then I will tell it you from sunrise to sunset. If you cannot divine it, you would not understand what I say. I will not molest myself for you. I do not wish to be profaned. And yet it seems as if this loneliness and not this love would prevail in the circumstances. because of the extravagant demand that they make on human nature. That indeed constitutes a new feature in their portrait, that they are the most exacting and extraordinate critics. Their quarrel with every man they meet is not with his kind, but with his degree. There is not enough of him. That is the only fault. They prolong the privilege of childhood and the wise of doing nothing by making immense demands on all the gladiators in the lists of action and fame. They make us feel the strange disappointment which overcasts every human youth. So many promising youths and never a finished man. Their profound nature will have a savage rudeness. The delicate one will be shallow, or the victim of sensibility. The richly accomplished will have some capital absurdity, so every piece has a crack. It is strange, but this masterpiece is a result of such an extreme delicacy that the most unobserved flaw in the boy will neutralize the most aspiring genius and spoil the work. Talk with the seaman or the hazard to life in his profession, and he will ask you, where are the old sailors? Do you not see that all are young men? And we on the sea of human thought, in like manner inquire, where are the old idealists? Where are they who represented to the last generation the extravagant hope which a few happy aspirants suggest to ours? And looking at the class of counsel and power and wealth, and at the matronage of the land, amidst all the prudence and all the triviality, one asks, where are they who represented genius, virtue, the invisible and heavenly world? To these, are they dead, taken in early ripeness to the gods, as ancient wisdom foretold their fate? Or did the high idea die out of them and leave their unperfumed body as its tomb and tablet, announcing to all that the celestial inhabitant who once gave them beauty has departed? Will it be better with the new generation? We easily predict a fair future to each new candidate who enters the lists. But we are frivolous and volatile, and by low aims and ill example to what we can to defeat this hope. Then these youths bring us a rough but effectual aid. By their unconcealed dissatisfaction, they expose our poverty and the insignificance of man to man. A man is a poor limitary benefactor. He ought to be a shower of benefits, a great influence, which should never let his brother go, but should refresh old merits continually with new ones, so that, though absent, he should never be out of my mind. His name never far from my lips. But if the earth should open at my side, or my last hour was come, his name should be the prayer. I should utter the universe. But in our experience, man is cheap, and friendship wants its deep sense. We affect to dwell with our friends in their absence, but we do not. When deed, word, or letter comes not, they let us go. These exacting children advertise us for our wants. There is no compliment, no smooth speech with them. They pay you only this one compliment of insatiable expectation. They aspire. They severely exact. And if they only stand fast in this watchtower and persist in demanding unto the end and without end, then are they terrible friends, whereof poet and priest cannot choose but stand in awe. And what if they eat clouds and drink wind? They have not been without service to the race of men, with this passion for what is great and extraordinary. It cannot be wondered at that they are repelled by vulgarity and frivolity in people. They say to themselves, it is better to be alone than in bad company. And it is really a wish to be met, the wish to find society for their hope and religion, which prompts them to shun what is called society. They feel that they are never so fit for friendship as when they have acquitted mankind and taken themselves to friend. A picture, a book, a favorite spot in the hills or the woods, which they can people with the fear and worthy creation of the fancy, can give them often forms so vivid that these, for the time, shall seem real, and society the illusion. But the solitary and fastidious manner not only withdraw them from the conversation, but from the labors of the world. They are not good citizens, not good members of society. Unwillingly, they bear their part of the public and private burdens. They do not willingly share in the public charities, in the public religious rights, in the enterprises of education, of missions foreign and domestic, in the abolition of the slave trade, or in the temperance society. They do not even like to vote. The philanthropists inquire whether transcendentalism does not mean sloth. They had as lief fear that their friend is dead and that he is a transcendentalist. For then he is paralyzed. For then is he paralyzed and can never do anything for humanity. What right, cries the good world, has the man of genius to retreat from work and indulge himself? Let me repeat that. What right, cries the good world, has the man of genius to retreat from work and indulge himself? The popular literary creed seems to be, I am sublime, I am a sublime genius. I ought not therefore to labor, but genius is the power to labor better and more availability. Deserves thy genius, exalted, the good, the illuminated, set apart from the rest, censuring their dullness and vices, as if they thought that by sitting very grand in their chairs, the very brokers, attorneys, congressmen would see the error of their ways and flock to them. But the good and wise must learn to act and carry salvation to the combatants and demagogues in the dusty arena below. On the part of these children, it is replied that life and the faculty seem to them gifts too rich to be squandered on such trifles as you propose to them. What you call your fundamental institutions, your great and holy causes, seem to them great abuses, and were nearly seen paltry matters. Each cause, as it is called, say abolition, temperance, say Calvinism, or Unitarianism, becomes speedily a little shop where the article, let it have been at first never so subtle and ethereal, is now made up into portable and convenient cakes and retailed in small quantities to suit purchases. You make very free use of these words, great and holy, but few things appear to them such. Few persons have any magnificence of nature to inspire enthusiasm, and the philanthropies and charities have a certain air of quackery. As to the general course of living and the daily employments of men, they cannot see much virtue in these, since they are parts of this vicious cycle. And as no great ends are answered by the men, there is nothing noble in the arts by which they are maintained. Nay, they have made the experiment and found that from the liberal professions to the coarsest manual labor, from the courtesies of the academy and the college to the conventions of the cotillion room and the morning call, there is a spirit of cowardly compromise and seeming which imitates a frightful skepticism, a life without love and an activity without an aim. Unless the action is necessary, unless it is adequate, I do not wish to perform it. I do not wish to do one thing but once. I do not love routine. Once possessed of the principle, it is equally easy to make 4 or 40,000 applications of it. A great man will be content to have indicated in any of the slightest manner his perception of the reigning idea of his time, and will leave to those who like it the multiplication of examples. When he has hit the white, the rest may shatter the target. Everything admonishes us how needlessly long life is. Every moment of a hero so raises and cheers us that a 12-month is an age. All that the brave Exantus brings home from his wars, and the recollection that at the stirring of Samos, in the heart of the battle, Pericles smiled on me and passed on to another detachment. It is the quality of the moment, not the number of days of events or of actors, but imports. New, we confess, and by no means happy, is our condition. If you want the aid of our labor, we ourselves stand in greater want of the labor. We are miserable with inaction. We perish of rest and rust, but we do not like your work. Then, says the world, show me your own. We have none. What will you do, then? Cries the world. We will wait. How long? Until the universe beckons and calls us to work. But whilst you wait, you grow old and useless. Be it so. I can sit in a corner and perish, as you call it, but I will not move until I have the highest command. If no call should come for years, for centuries, then I know that the want of the universe is the attestation of faith by my abstinence. Your virtuous projects, so-called, do not cheer me. I know that which shall come with cheer. I know that which shall come will cheer me. If I cannot work, at least I need not lie. All that is clearly due today is not to lie. In other places, other men have encountered sharp trials and have behaved themselves well. The martyrs were asunder, or hung alive on meat hooks. Cannot we screw our courage to patience and truth, and without complaint, or even with good humor, await our return of action in the infinite councils? But to come a little closer to the secret of these persons, we must say that to them it seems a very easy matter to answer the objections of the man of the world, but not so easy to dispose of the doubts and objections that occur themselves. They are exercised in their own spirit with queries which acquaint them with all adversity and with the trials of the bravest heroes. When I asked them concerning their private experience, they answered somewhat in this wise. It is not to be denied that there must be some wide difference between my faith and other faith. And mine is a certain brief experience which surprised me in the highway or in the market, in some place, at some time, whether in the body or out of the body, God knoweth, and made me aware that I had played the fool with fools all this time, but that Lord existed for me and for all, and that to me belonged trust, a child's trust, and obedience, and the worship of ideas, and I should never be a fool more. Well, in the space of an hour probably, I was let down from this height. I was at my old tricks, the selfish member of a selfish society. My life is superficial, takes no root in the deep world. I ask, when shall I die and be relieved of the responsibility of seeing a universe I do not use? I wish to exchange this flash of lightning fade for continuous daylight, this fever glow for a benign climate. These two states of thought diverge every moment and stand in wild contrast. To him who looks at his life from these moments of illumination, it will seem that he skulks and plays a mean, shiftless, and subaltern part in the world that is to be done, which he has not skill to do. or to be said, which others can say better. And he lies by or occupies his hands with some plaything until his hour comes again. Much of our reading, much of our labor seems mere waiting. It was not that we were born for. Any other could do it, as well or better. So little skill enters into these works, so little do they mix with the divine life, that it really signifies little what we do. Whether we turn a grindstone, or ride, or run, or make fortunes, or govern the state, the worst feature of this foul consciousness is that the two lives of the understanding and of the soul, which we lead, really show very little relation to each other, never meet and measure each other. One prevails now, all buzz and din, and the other prevails then, all infinitude and paradise. And with the progress of life, the two discover no greater disposition to reconcile themselves. Yet what is my faith? What am I? What but a thought of serenity and independence, and abode in the deep blue sky? Presently, the clouds shut down again, yet we retain the belief that this pretty web we weave will at last be overshot and reticulated with veins of the blue. And the moments will characterize the days. Patience, then, is for us, is it not? Patience and still patience. When we pass, as presently we shall, into some infinitude out of this Iceland of negations, it will please us to reflect that, though we have few virtues for consolations, we bore with our indigence, nor one strove to repair it with hypocrisy or false heat of any kind. But this class are not sufficiently characterized if we omit to add that they are lovers and worshippers of beauty, in the eternal trinity of truth, goodness, and beauty, each in its perfection, including the three. They prefer to make beauty the sign and head. Something of the same taste is observable in all the moral movements of the time, in the religious and benevolent enterprises. They have a liberal, even an aesthetic spirit, a reference to beauty and action. Sounds, to be sure, a little hollow and ridiculous in the ears of the old church. In politics, that has often sufficed when they treated of justice, if they kept the bounds of selfish calculation, if they granted restitution, it was prudence which granted it. But the justice which is now claimed for the black and the pauper and the drunkard is for beauty, is for a necessity to the soul of the agent, not the beneficiary. I say this is the tendency, not yet the realization. Our virtue totters and trips, does not yet walk firmly. Its representatives are austere. They preach and denounce. Their rectitude is not yet a grace. They are still liable to that slight taint of burlesque, which, in our strange world, attaches to the zealot. A saint should be as dear as the apple of the eye, yet we are tempted to smile, and we flee from the working of the speculative reformer to escape that same slight ridicule. Alas for these days of derision and criticism. We call the beautiful the highest, because it appears to use the golden mean, escaping the dowdiness of the good and the heartlessness of the true. They are lovers of nature also, and find an indemnity in the inviolable order of the world, for the violated order and grace of man. There is no doubt a great deal of well-founded objection to be spoken or felt against the saying and doings of the class, some of whose traits we have selected. No doubt they will lay themselves open to criticism and lampoons, and as ridiculous stories will be to be told of them as of any, there will be cant and pretension. There will be subtlety and moonshine. These persons are of unequal strength, and do not all prosper They complain that everything around them must be denied. And if feeble, it takes all their strength to deny before they can begin to lead their own life. Grave seniors insist on their respect to this institution and that usage, to an obsolete history, to some vocation or college or etiquette or beneficiary or charity, a morning or evening call, which they resist as what does not concern them, but it costs much sleepless nights, alienations and misgivings. They have so many moods about it. These old guardians never change their minds. They have but one mood on the subject, namely that Antony is very perverse, that it is quite as much as Antony can do to assert his rights, abstain from what he thinks foolish, and keep his temper. He cannot help the reaction of his injustice and his own mind. He is braced up and stilted. All freedom and flowing genius, all sallies of wit and frolic nature, are quite out of the question. It is well if he can keep from lying, injustice and suicide. This is no time for gaiety and grace. His strength and spirit are wasted in rejection. But the strong spirits overpower those around them without effort. Their thought and emotion comes in like a flood, quite withdraws from them all notice of these carping critics. They surrender themselves with glad heart to the heavenly guide, and only by implication reject the clamorous nonsense of the hour. Grave genius talk to the deaf. Church and old book mumble and ritualize to an unheeding, preoccupied, and advancing mind, and thus they, by happiness of greater momentum, lose no time but take the right road at first. But all these of whom I speak are not proficients. They are novices. They only show the road in which man should travel. When the soul has greater health and prowess, yet let them feel the dignity of their charge and deserve a lordship power. Their heart is the ark in which the fire is concealed, which shall burn in the broader and universal flame. Let them obey the genius. Then most, when his impulse is as wildest, then most when he seems to lead to uninhabitable deserts of thought and life. For the path which the hero travels alone is the highway of health and benefit to mankind. What is the privilege and nobility of our nature but its persistency through its power to attach itself to what is permanent? Society has its duties in reference to this class and must behold them with what charity it can. Possibly some benefit may yet accrue from them to the state. In our mechanic sphere, there must be not only bridges, plows, carpenters, planes, and baking troughs, but also some few finer instruments, rain gouges, thermometers, telescopes, and in society, besides farmers, sailors, and weavers, there must be a few persons of purer fire kept, especially as gorgeous and meters of character, persons of a fine detecting instinct who note the smallest accumulations of wit and feeling in the bystander. Perhaps, too, there might be room for the exciters and monitors, collectors of the heavenly spark, with power to convey the electricity to others. Or as a storm-tossed vessel at sea speaks the frigate or line packet to learn its longitude. So it may not be without its advantage that we should now and then encounter rare and gifted men to compare the points of our spiritual compass and verify our bearings from superior chronometers. Amidst the downward tendency and proneness of things, when every voice is raised for a new road or another statue, or a subscription of stock for an improvement in dress or in dentistry, for a new house or a larger business, for a political party or the division of an estate, Will you not tolerate one or two solitary voices in the land speaking for thoughts and principles not marketable or perishable? Soon these improvements and mechanical inventions will be superseded, these modes of living lost out of memory, these cities rotted, ruined by war, by new inventions, by new seats of trade, or the geological changes, all gone. Like the shells which sprinkle the sea beach with a white colony today, forever renewed to be forever destroyed. But the thoughts which these few hermits strove to proclaim by silence as well as by speech, not only by what they did, but by what they forbore to do, shall abide in beauty and strength, to reorganize themselves in nature, to invest themselves anew in other, perhaps higher endowed and happier mixed clay than ours, in fuller union with the surrounding system. The Lord's Supper. This is a sermon that Emerson preached before the Second Church, of which he was pastor in Boston, September 3rd, 1832. In the preceding June, he had asked the church for permission to discontinue administering the sacrament according to existing ritual, since he did not believe that Jesus had intended men to observe it century after century. In this sermon, which was the result of much scholarship and meditating on Emerson's part, he set forth the reasons why he could not conscientiously observe the communion. After considerable discussion in committees, the church regretfully was unable to accede to Emerson's requests. His resignation was accepted with affectionate regret. Although Emerson filled pulpit engagements many times afterward, he never again accepted a permanent appointment. I like a church. I like a cowl. I love a prophet of the soul, and on my heart monastic aisles, full like sweet strains on pensive smiles, yet not for all his faith can see. Would I that cowled churchman be? Why should it vest on him a lure, which I could not on me endure? The word unto the prophet spoken was writ on stables yet unbroken. The word by seers or sibyls told, in grooves of oak or fanes of gold, still floats upon the morning wind, still whispers till a willing mend. The Lord's Supper. The kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost. Roman. In the history of the church, no subject had been more fruitful of controversy than the Lord's Supper. There never has been any unanimity in understanding of its nature, nor any uniformity in the mode of celebrating it, without considering the frivolous questions which have been lately debated as to the posture in which men should partake of it, whether mixed or unmixed wine should be served, whether leavened or unleavened bread should be broken. The questions have been settled differently in every church. Who should be admitted to the feast, and how often it should be prepared. In the Catholic Church, infants were at one time permitted and then forbidden to partake. And since the 9th century, the laity received the bread only, the cup being reserved to the priesthood. So as to the time of solemnity. In the Fourth Lateran Council, it was decreed that any believer should communicate at least once in a year at Easter. Afterwards, it was determined that this sacrament should be received 3 times in the year. At Easter, Whitsuntide, and Christmas. But more important, controversies have arisen respecting its nature. famous question of the real presence was the main controversy between the Church of England and the Church of Rome. The doctrine of the consubstantiation taught by Luther was denied by Calvin in the Church of England. Archbishops Laud and Wake maintained that the elements were, and a Eucharist was sacrificed of thanksgiving to God. Cudworth and Warburton, that this was not a sacrifice, but a sacrificial feast. And Bishop Hoadley, that it was neither a sacrifice nor a feast after sacrifice, but a simple commemoration. And finally, it is now near 200 years since the Society of Quakers denied the authority of the rite altogether and give good reasons for discussing it. I allude to these facts only to show that, so far from the supper being a tradition in which men are fully agreed, there has always been the widest room for difference of opinion upon this particular. Having recently given particular attention to the subject, I was led to the conclusion that Jesus did not intend to establish an institution for perpetual observance when he ate the Passover with his disciples, and further to the opinion that it is not expedient to celebrate it as we do. I shall now endeavor to state distinctly my reasons for these two opinions. Number 1, the authority of the rite. An account of the Last Supper of Christ with his disciples is given by the four evangelists Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In St. Matthew's Gospel are recorded the words of Jesus in giving bread and wine on that occasion to his disciples, but no expression occurs intimating that this feast was hereafter to be commemorated. In St. Mark, the same words are recorded, and still with no intimation that the occasion was to be remembered. St. Luke, after relating to the breaking of the bread, has these words, quote, "This do in remembrance of me," end quote. In St. John, although other occurrences of the same evening are related, this whole transaction is passed over without notice. Now observe the facts. 2 of the evangelists, namely Matthew and John, were of the 12 disciples and were present on that occasion. Neither of them drops the slightest information of any intention on the part of Jesus to set up anything permanent. John, especially the beloved disciple who has recorded with minuteness the conversation and the transactions of that memorable evening, has quite omitted such a notice. Neither does it appear to have come to the knowledge of Mark, who, though not an eyewitness, related the other facts. This material fact, that the occasion was to be remembered, is found in Luke alone, who was not present. There's no reason, however, that we know for rejecting the account of Luke. I doubt not the expression was used by Jesus. I shall presently consider its meaning. I have only brought these accounts together that you may judge whether it is likely that his solemn institution to be continued to the end of time by all mankind as they should come, nation after nation, within the influence of the Christian religion, would have been established in this light, in a manner so slight, that the intention of commemorating it should not appear from the narrative, to have caught the ear or dwelt in the mind of the only 2 among the 12 who wrote down what happened. Still, we must suppose that the expression, "this do in remembrance of me," had come to the ear of Luke from some disciple who was present. What did it really signify? It is a prophetic and an affectionate expression. Jesus is a Jew, sitting with his countrymen, celebrating their national feast. He thinks of his own impending death and wishes the minds of his disciples to be prepared for it. When hereafter he says to them, "You shall keep the Passover," it will have an altered aspect to your eyes. It is now a historical covenant of God with the Jewish nation. Hereafter it will remind you of a new covenant sealed with my blood. In years to come, as long as your people shall come to Jerusalem to keep this feast, the connection which has subsisted between us will give a new meaning in your eyes to the national festival as the anniversary of my death. I see natural feeling and beauty in the use of such language. From Jesus, a friend to his friends, I can readily imagine that he was willing and desirous when his disciples met. His memory should hallow their intercourse, but I cannot bring myself to believe that in the use of such an expression he looked beyond the living generation, beyond the abolition of the festival he was celebrating, and the scattering of the nation, and meant to impose a memorial feast upon the whole world. Without presuming to fix precisely the purpose in the mind of Jesus, you'll see that many opinions may be entertained of his intention, all consistent with the opinion that he did not design a perpetual ordinance. He may have foreseen that his disciples would meet to remember him, and that with good effect. It may have crossed his mind that this would be easily continued 100 or 1,000 years, as men more easily transmit a form than a virtue, and yet had been altogether out of his purpose, to fasten it upon men in all times and all countries. But though the words, quote, "do this in remembrance of me," end quote, do not occur in Matthew, Mark, or John, and although it should be granted us that, taken alone, they do not necessarily import so much as is usually thought, yet many persons are apt to imagine that the very striking and personal manner in which the eating and drinking is described indicates a striking informal purpose to found a festival. And I admit that this impression might probably be left upon the mind of one who read only the passages under consideration in the New Testament. But this impression is removed by reading any narrative of the mode in which the ancient or the modern Jews have kept the Passover. It is then perceived that the leading circumstances in the Gospels are only a faithful account of that ceremony. Jesus did not celebrate the Passover, and afterwards the supper, but the supper was the Passover. He did not wish his disciples exactly what every master of a family in Jerusalem was doing at the same hour with his household. It appears that the Jews ate the lamb and the unleavened bread, and drank wine after a prescribed manner. It was the custom of the master of the feast to break the bread and to bless it using this formula which the Talmudists have preserved to us. Blessed be thou, O Lord, our God, who givest us the fruit of the vine, and then to give the cup to all. Among the modern Jews, who in their dispersion retained the Passover a hymn, it was also sung after the ceremony, specifying the 12 great works done by God for the deliverance of the fathers out of Egypt. But still, it may be asked, why did Jesus make expressions so extraordinary and emphatic as these? Quote, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Take, eat. This is my blood, which is shed for you. Drink it." End quote. I reply, they are not extraordinary expressions from him. They were familiar in his mouth. He always taught by parables and symbols. It was the national way of teaching, and was largely used by him. Remember the readiness which he always showed to spiritualize every occurrence. He stopped and wrote on the sand. He admonished his disciples respecting the leaven of the Pharisees. He instructed the woman in Samaria respecting the living water. He permitted himself to be anointed, declaring that it was for his intimate. He washed the feet of his disciples. These are admitted to be symbolical actions and expressions. Here, in like manner, he calls the bread his body and bids the disciples to eat. He had used the same expression repeatedly before. The reason why St. John does not repeat his words on this occasion seems to be that he had reported a similar discourse of Jesus to the people of Capernaum, more at length already in John. He there tells the Jews, quote, "Except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, ye have no life in you." End quote. And when the Jews on that occasion complained that they did not comprehend what he meant, he added for their better understanding, and as if for our understanding, that we might not think his body was to be actually eaten, and he only meant we should live by his commandment. He closed his discourse with these explanatory expressions, quote, "The flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak to you, they are spirit, they are life." End quote. Whilst whilst I am upon the topic, I cannot help remarking that it is not a little singular that we should have preserved this right and insisted upon perpetrating one symbolical act of Christ, whilst we have totally neglected all others, particularly one other which had at least an equal claim to our observance. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples and told them that, as he had washed his feet, they ought to wash one another's feet. For he had given them an example that they should do as he had done to them. I ask any person who believes the supper that had been designed by Jesus to be commemorated forever to go and read the account of it in the other Gospels, and then compare with it the account of this transaction in St. John, and tell me if this be not much more explicitly authorized than the supper. It only differs in this, that we have found the supper used in New England and the washing of the feet not. But if we had found it an established right in our churches on grounds of mere authority, it would have been impossible to have argued against it. That right is used by the Church of Rome and by the Sandemanians. It has been very properly dropped by other Christians. Why? For two reasons. One, because it was a local custom and unsuitable in Western countries. And two, because it was typical and all understood that humility is the thing signified. But the Passover was local too, and does not concern us, and its bread and wine were typical, and do not help us to understand the redemption which they signified. These views of the original account of the Lord's Supper lead me to esteem it an occasion full of solemn and prophetic interest, but never intended by Jesus to be the foundation of a perpetual institution. It appears, however, in Christian history that the disciples had very early taken advantage of these impressive words of Christ to hold religious meetings where they broke bread and drank wine as symbols. I look upon this fact as very natural in the circumstances of the church. Disciples lived together. They threw all their property into a common stock. They were bound together by the memory of Christ, and nothing could be more natural than that this eventful evening should be affectionately remembered by them. That they, Jews like Jesus, should adopt his expressions and his types, and furthermore, that what was done with peculiar propriety by them, his personal friends, with less propriety, should come to be extended to the companions also. In this way, religious feasts grew up among the early Christians. They were readily adopted by the Jewish converts, who were familiar with religious feasts, and also by the pagan converts, whose idolatrous worship had been made up of sacred festivals, and who very readily abused these to gross riot, as appears from the censors of St. Paul. Many persons consider this fact, the observance of such a memorial feast by the early disciples, decisive of the question whether it ought to be observed by us. There was good reason for his personal friends to remember their friend and repeat his words. It was only too probable that among the half-converted pagans and Jews, any rite, any form would find favor, whilst yet unable to comprehend the spiritual character of Christianity. The circumstance, however, that St. Paul adopts these views has seemed to many persons conclusive in favor of the institution. I am of opinion that it is wholly upon the epistle to Corinthians and not upon the Gospels that the ordinance stands upon this matter of St. Paul's view of the supper. A few important considerations must be stated. The end which he has in view in the 11th chapter of the first epistle is not to enjoin upon his friends to observe the supper, but to censure their abuse of it. We quote the passage nowadays as if it enjoined attendance upon the supper, but he wrote it merely to chide them for drunkenness, to make their enormity plainer. He got back to the origin of their religious feast to show what sort of feast that was, out of which this riot of theirs came, and so relates the transactions of the Last Supper. I have received the Lord, end quote, he says, quote, that which I delivered to you, end quote. By this expression, it is often thought that a miraculous communication is implied, but certainly without good reason it is remembered that St. Paul was living in the lifetime of all the apostles, who could give him an account of the transaction, and it is contrary to all reason to suppose that God should work a miracle to convey information that could so easily be got by natural means. So that the import of the expression is that he had received a story of an eyewitness such as we also possess. But there is a material circumstance which diminishes our confidence in the correctness of the apostolic view, and that is the observation that his mind had not escaped the prevalent error of the primitive church, the belief, namely, that the second coming of Christ would shortly occur, until which time, he tells them, this feast was to be kept. Elsewhere he tells them that at that time the world would be burnt up with fire, and a new government established in which the saints would sit on thrones. So slow were the disciples, during the life and after the ascension of Christ, to receive the idea which we receive, that his second coming was a spiritual kingdom, the dominion of his religion in the hearts of men, to be extended gradually over the whole world. In this manner, we may see clearly enough how this ancient ordinance got its footing among the early Christians, and this single expectation of a speedy reappearance of a temporal Messiah, which kept its influence even over so spiritual a man as St. Paul, would naturally tend to preserve the use of the rite when one established. We arrive then at this conclusion, first, that it does not appear from a careful examination of the account of the Last Supper in the Evangelists that it was designed by Jesus to be perpetual. Secondly, that it does not appear that the opinion of St. Paul, all things considered, ought to alter our opinion derived from the Evangelists. One general remark before quitting this branch of the subject: we ought to be cautious in taking even the best ascertained opinions and practices of the primitive church for our own. If it could be satisfactorily known that they esteemed it authorized and to be transmitted forever, that does not settle the question for us. We know how inveterately they were attached to their Jewish prejudices, and how often even the influence of Christ failed to enlarge their views. On every other subject, succeeding times have learned to form a judgment more in accordance with the spirit of Christianity than was the practice of the early ages. 2. But it is said, admit, that the rite was not designed to be perpetual. What harm doth it? Here it stands generally accepted under some form. By the Christian world, some doubted occasion of much good. It is not better it should remain? Take this question of expediency. I proceed to state a few subjections that, in my judgment, lie against its use in its present form. Number one, if the view which I have taken of the history of the institution be correct, then the claim of authority should be dropped in administering it. You say every time you celebrate the rite that Jesus enjoined it. The whole language used conveys that impression. But if you read the New Testament as I do, you do not believe he did. It has seemed to me that the use of this ordinance tends to produce confusion in our views of the relation of the soul to God. It is the old objection to the doctrine of the Trinity, that the true worship was transferred from God to Christ, or that such confusion was introduced into the soul that an undivided worship was given nowhere. Is not that the effect of the Lord's Supper? I appeal now to the convictions of communicants, and ask such persons whether they have not been occasionally conscious of a painful confusion of thought between the worship due to God and the commemoration due to Christ. For the service does not stand upon the basis of a voluntary act, but is imposed by authority. It is an expression of gratitude to Christ, enjoined by Christ. It is an endeavor to keep Jesus in mind, whilst yet the prayers are addressed to God. I fear it is the effect of this ordinance to clothe Jesus with an authority which he never claimed and which distracts the mind of the worshipper. I know our opinions differ much respecting the nature and offices of Christ and the degree of veneration to which he is entitled. I am so much a Unitarian as this, that I believe that human mind can admit but one God, and that every effort to pay religious homage to more than one being goes to take away all right ideals. I appeal, brethren, to your individual experience in the moment when you make the last petition to God, though it be but a silent wish that he may approve you, or add one moment to your life. Do you not, in the very act, necessarily exclude all other beings from your thought? In that act, the soul stands alone with God, and Jesus is no more present to your mind than your brother or your child. But is not Jesus called in Scripture the mediator? He is a mediator. He is the mediator. In that only sense in which possibly any being can mediate between God and man. That is an instructor of man. He teaches us how to become like God. And a true disciple of Jesus will receive the light he gives most thankfully. But the thanks he offers, and which an exalted being will accept, are not compliments, commemorations, but the use of that instruction. Page 116. Passing other objections, I come to this, and that the use of the elements, however suitable to the people and the modes of thought in the East, where it originated, is foreign and unsuited to affect us. Whatever long usage and strong association may have done in some individuals to deaden this repulsion, I apprehend that their use is rather tolerated than loved by any of us. We are not accustomed to express our thoughts or emotions by symbolical actions. Most men find the bread and wine no aid to devotion, and to some it is a painful impediment. To eat bread is one thing, to love precepts of Jesus and resolve to obey them is quite another. The statement of this objection leads me to say that I think this difficulty, wherever it is felt to be entitled to the greatest weight, it is alone a sufficient objection to the ordinance. It is my own objection. This mode of commemorating Jesus Christ is not suitable to me. This is reason enough why I should abandon it, if I believe it was enjoined by Jesus on his disciples, and that he even contemplated making permanent this mode of commemoration, every way agreeable to an Eastern mind, yet on trial it was disagreeable to my own feelings. I should not adopt it. I should choose other ways which are more effectual upon me. He would approve more, for I choose that my remembrance of him should be pleasing, affecting, religious. I will love him as a glorified friend, after the free way of friendship, and not pay him a stiff sign of respect, as men do those whom they fear. A passage read from his discourses, a moving provocation to works like his, any act or meeting which tends to awaken pure thought, a flow of love and original design of virtue, I call a worthy, a true commemoration. The importance ascribed to this particular ordinance is not consistent with the spirit of Christianity. The general object and effect of the ordinance is unexceptionable, has been, and is, I doubt not, the occasion of indefinite good. But importance is given by Christians to it, which never can belong to any form. My friends, the apostoli, well assures us that the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost. I am not so foolish as to claim against forms. Forms are as essential as bodies, but to exalt particular forms to adhere to one form a moment after it is outgrown is unreasonable, and it is alien to the spirit of Christ. If I understand the distinction of Christianity, the reason why it is to be preferred over all other systems and is divine is this, that it is a moral system that represents men with truths which are their own reason and enjoins practices that are their own justification. That if miracles may be said to have been in its evidence to the first Christians, they are not its evidence to us, but the doctrines themselves. That every practice is Christian which praises itself, and every practice unchristian which condemns itself. I am not engaging Christianity by decent forms or saving ordinances. It is not usage. It is not what I do not understand that binds me to it. Let these be the sandy foundations of falsehoods. What I revere and obey in it is its reality, its boundless charity, its deep interior life, the rest it gives to mine, the echo it returns to my thoughts, the perfect accord it makes with my reason through all its representation of God and his providence, and the persuasion and courage that come out thence to lead me upward and onward. Freedom is the essence of his faith. It has for its object simply to make men good and wise. Its institutions then should be as flexible as the wants of men. That form out of which the life and suitableness have departed should be as worthless in his eyes as the dead leaves that are falling around us. And therefore, although for the satisfaction for others I have labored to show by the history that this right was not intended to be perpetual, although I have gone back to weigh the expressions of Paul, I feel that here is the true point of view. In the midst of considerations as what Paul thought and why he so thought, I cannot help feeling that it is time misspent to argue to or from his convictions, or those of Luke and John, respecting any form. I seem to lose the substance and seeking the shadow. That for which Paul lived and died so gloriously, that for which Jesus gave himself to be crucified, the end that animated the 1,000 martyrs and heroes who have followed his steps, was to redeem us from a formal religion and teach us to seek our well-being and formation of the soul. The whole world was full of idols and ordinances. The Jewish was a religion of forms. It was all body. It had no life, and the Almighty God was pleased to qualify and send forth a man to teach men that they must serve him with the heart, that only that life was religious, which was thoroughly good, that sacrifice with smoke and forms with shadows. This man lived and died true to this purpose, and now with his blessed word and life before us, Christians must contend that it is a matter of vital importance, really a duty to commemorate him by a certain form, whether that form be agreeable to their understandings or not. Is not this to make vain the gift of God? Is not this to turn back the hand on the dial? Is not this to make ourselves forget that not forms but duties, not names but righteousness and love are enjoined, and that in the eye of God there is no other measure of the value of any one form than the measure of its use? There remain some practical objections to the ordinance, into which I shall not now enter. There is one on which I had intended to say a few words. I mean the unfavorable relation in which it places that numerous class of persons who abstain from it merely from disinclination to the right. Influenced by these considerations, I have proposed to the brethren of the Church to drop the use of the elements and the claim of authority in the administration of this ordinance, and have suggested a mode in which a meeting for the same purpose might be held free of objection. My brethren have considered my views with patience and candor, and have recommended unanimously an adherence to the present form. I have therefore been compelled to consider whether it becomes me to administer it. I am clearly of opinion I ought not. This discourse has already been so far extended that I can only say that the reason of my determination is shortly this. It is my desire in the office of a Christian minister to do nothing which I cannot do with my whole heart. Having said this, I have said all. I have no hostility to this institution. I am only stating my want of sympathy with it. Neither should I ever have obtruded this opinion upon other people, had I not been called by my office to administer it. That is the end of my opposition, that I am not interested in it. I am content that it stands to the end of the world, if it please men and please heaven, and I shall rejoice in all the good it produces. As it is the prevailing opinion and feeling in our religious community that it is an indispensable part of the pastoral office to administer this ordinance, I am about to resign to your hands. I am about to resign into your hands that office which you have confided to me. It has many duties for which I am feebly qualified. It has some which it will always be my delight to discharge according to my ability, wherever I exist. And whilst the recollection of its claims oppress me with a sense of my unworthiness, I am consoled by the hope that no time and no change can deprive me of the satisfaction of pursuing and exercising its highest functions. Essays. Emerson's second book was published in 1841. It was almost immediately issued in England with a preface by Carlyle. Most of the essays were composed from lectures that Emerson had been giving in various places during the preceding years. History. There is no great and no small to the soul that maketh all. And where it cometh, all things are, and it cometh everywhere. I am owner of the sphere, of the 7 stars, and the solar year, of Caesar's hand and Plato's brain, of Lord Christ's heart and Shakespeare's strain. There's one mind common to all individual men. Every man is an inlet to the same and to all of the same. He that is once admitted to the right of reason is made a free man of the whole estate. What Plato has taught, he may think. What a saint has felt, he may feel. What any time has befallen any man, he can understand. Who hath access to this universal mind is a party to all that is or can be done. For this is the only and sovereign agent. Of the works of this mind, history is the record. Its genius is illustrated by the entire series of days. Man is explicable by nothing less than all his history. Without hurry, without rest, the human spirit goes forth from the beginning to embody every faculty, every thought, every emotion which belongs to it. In appropriate events, by the thoughts, is always prior to the fact. All the facts of history pre-exist in the mind as laws. Each law, in turn, is made by circumstances predominant, and the limits of nature give power to but one at a time. And man in the whole encyclopedia of facts, the creation of 1,000 forests is in one equal. Egypt, Greece, Rome, Gaul, Britain, America lie folded already in the first man. Epoch after epoch, camp, kingdom, empire, republic, democracy, and merely the application of his manifold spirit to the manifold world. This human mind wrote history, and this must read it. The Sphinx must solve her own riddle, if the whole of history is in one man. It is all to be explained from individual experience. There is a relation between the hours of our life and the centuries of time. As the air I breathe is drawn from the great repositories of nature, as the light of my book is yielded by a star 100 millions of miles distant, as the poise of my body depends on the equilibrium of centrifugal and centripetal forces, so the hours should be instructed by the ages and the ages explained by the hours of the universal mind. Each individual man is one more incarnation. All its properties consist in him. Each new fact in his private experience flashes a light on what great bodies of men have done. The crisis of his life referred to national crisis. Every revolution was first a thought in one man's mind, and when the same thought occurs to another man, it is the key to that era. Every reform was once a private opinion, and when it shall be a private opinion, again it will solve the problem of the age. The fact narrated must correspond to something in me to be credible or intelligible. As we read, must become Greeks, Romans, Turks, priest and king, martyr and executioner, must fasten these images to some reality in our secret experience, or we shall learn nothing rightly. What befell Asdrubal or Caesar Borgia is as much an illustration of the mind powers and deprivations as what has befallen us. Each new law and political movement has a meaning for you. Stand before each of its tablets, and say, under this mask did my Proteus nature hide itself. This remedies the defect of our too great nearness to ourselves. This throws our actions into perspective, and as crabs, goats, scorpions, the balance, and the water pot lose the meanness and hunger signs in the zodiac, so I can see my own vices without heat in the distant persons of Solomon, Alcibiades, and Catiline. It is the universal nature which gives worth to particular men and things. Human life as containing this is mysterious and inviolable, and we hedge it round with penalties and laws. All laws derive hence the ultimate reason. All express more or less distinctly some command of the supreme, illimitable essence. Properly also hold of the soul, covers great spiritual facts, and instinctively we at first hold to it with swords and laws and wide and complex combinations. The obscure consciousness of this fact is the light of all our day. The claim of claim, the plea for education, for justice, for charity, the foundation of friendship and love, and of the heroism and the grandeur which belong to acts of self-reliance. It is remarkable that involuntary we always read as superior beings. Universal history, the poets, the romancers, do not in their stateliest pictures, and the sacerdotal, the imperial palaces, in the triumphs of will or of genius, anywhere lose our ear. Everywhere make us feel that we intrude, that this is for better men. But rather it is true that in their grandest strokes we feel most at home. All that Shakespeare says of the king yonder slip of a boy that reads in the corner feels to be true of himself. We sympathize in the great moments of history, and the great discoveries, the great resistances, the great prosperities of men, because their law was enacted. The sea was searched, a lamb was found, or the blow was struck, for us, as we ourselves in that place would have done or applauded. We had the same interest in condition and character. We honor the rich because they have externally the freedom, power, and grace which we feel to be proper to man, proper to us. So all that is said of the wise man by Stoic or Oriental or modern essayists describes to each reader's own idea, describes his unattained but attainable self. All literature writes the character of the wise man. Books, monuments, pictures, conversation are portraits in which he finds the lineaments his forming. The silent and the eloquent praise him and accost him, and he is stimulated wherever he moves, as by personal allusions. A true aspirant therefore never needs look for allusions personal and laudatory in discourse. He bears the commendation, not of himself, but more sweet of that character he seeks. And every word that is said concerning character, ye further in every fact and circumstance. In the running river and the rustling corn, praise is looked, homage tendered, love flows from mute nature, from the mountains and light of the firmament. These hints dropped as it were from sleep and night, let us use in broad day. The student is to read history actively and not passively, to esteem his own life the text, and books the commentary. Thus compelled, the muse of history will utter oracles as never to those who do not respect themselves. I have no expectation that any man will read history aright, who thinks that what was done in a remote age by men whose names have resounded far has any deeper sense than what he is doing today. The world exists for the education of each man. There is no age or state of society or mode of action in history to which there is not somewhat corresponding in his life. Everything tends in a wonderful manner to abbreviate itself and yield its own virtue to him. He should see that he can live all history in his own person. He must sit solidly at home and not suffer himself to be bullied by kings or empires, but know that he is greater than all the geography, and all the government of the world. He must transfer the point of view from which history is commonly read, from Rome and Athens and London to himself, and not deny his conviction that he is the court, and if England or Egypt have anything to say to him, he'll try the case. If not, let him forever be silent. He must attain and maintain that lofty sight where facts yield their secret, sense and poetry, and annals are alike. The instinct of the mind, the purpose of nature, betrays itself in the use we make of the signal narrations of history. Time dissipates to shining either the solid angularity of facts. Time dissipates to shining ether the solid angularity of facts. No anchor, no cable, no fences avail to keep a fact a fact. Babylon, Troy, Tyre, Palestine, and even early Rome are passing already into fiction. The Garden of Eden, the sun standing still in Gabon, is poetry thenceforward to all nations. Who cares what the fact was when we have made a constellation of it to hang in heaven, an immortal sign? London and Paris and New York must go the same way. What is history, said Napoleon, but a fable agreed upon? This life of ours is stuck round with Egypt, Greece, Gaul, England, war, colonization, church, court, and commerce. As with so many flowers and wild ornaments, grave and gay, I will not make more account of them. I believe in eternity. I can find Greece, Asia, Italy, Spain, and the islands, the genius and creative principle of each and of all areas in my own mind. We are always coming up with the emphatic facts of history, in our private experience, and verifying them there. All history becomes subjective. In other words, there is probably no all history becomes subjective. In other words, there is properly no history, only biography. Every mind must know the whole lesson for itself, must go over the whole ground. What it does not see, what it does not live, it will not know. What the former age has epitomized into a formula, a rule, for manipular convenience, it will lose all the good of verifying for itself by means of the wall of that rule. Somewhere, sometime, it will demand and find compensation for that loss by doing the work itself. Ferguson discovered many things in astronomy which had long been known, the better for him. History must be this, or it is nothing. Every law which the state enacts indicates a fact in human nature. That is all. We must in ourselves see the necessary reason of every fact, see how it could and must be. So stand before every public and private work, before a narration of Burke, for a victory of Napoleon, for a martyrdom of Sir Thomas More of Sydney, of Marmaduke Robinson, before a French reign of terror, and a Salem hanging of witches, before a fanatic revival and the animal magnetism in Paris, or in Providence. We assume that we, under like influence, should be alike affected, and should achieve alike. And we aim to master intellectually the steps and reach the same height of the same degradation that our fellow proxy has done. All inquiry into antiquity, all curiosity respecting the pyramids, excavated sites, Stonehenge, Ohio circles, Mexico, Memphis, is a desire to do away with this wild, savage, and preposterous there or then, and introduce in its place the here and now. Belzoni digs and measures in the mummy pits and pyramids of Thebes until he can see the end of the difference between the monstrous work and himself. When he has satisfied himself in general and in detail, and was made by such a person as he, so armed and so motived, and to ends to which he himself should have worked the problem solved. His thought lives along the whole line of temples and sphinxes, and catacombs, passes through them, all with satisfaction, and they live again to the mind, or are now. The Gothic cathedral affirms that it was done by us, and not done by us. Surely it was by man, but we find it not in our man, but we apply ourselves to the history of its production. We put ourselves into the palace and state of the builder. We remember the forest dwellers, the first temples, adherence to the first type, and the decoration of it as the wealth of the nation increased. The value which is given to wood by carving led to the carving over the whole mountain of stone of a cathedral. When we have gone through this process and added thereto the Catholic Church, its cross, its music, its processions, its saints, days and image worship, we have, as it were, been the man that made the minister. We have seen how it could and must be. We have a sufficient reason. The difference between men is the principle of association. Some men classify objects by color and size and other accidents of appearance, others by intrinsic likeness or by the relation of cause and effect. The progress of the intellect is to the clearer vision of causes which neglects surface differences. To the poet, to the philosopher, to the saint, all things are friendly and sacred, all events profitable, all days holy, all men divine, for the eye is fastened on the life and slights the circumstance. Every chemical substance, every plant, every animal in its growth teaches the unity of cause, the variety of appearance. Upborn and surrounded as we are by this all-creating nature, soft and fluid as a cloud or the air, why should we be such hard pedants and magnify a few forms? Why should we make account of time or of magnitude or of figure? The soul knows them not, and genius, obeying its law, knows how to play with them as a young child plays with graybeards and in churches. Genius studies the casual thought and far back in the womb of things, sees the rays parting from one orb that diverge ere they fall by infinite diameters. Genius watches the monad through all his masks as he performs the metaphysics of nature. Genius attacks through the fly, through the caterpillar, through the grub, through the egg, through the constant individual thought. Countless individuals, the fixed species, through many species, the genius. Through all genera, the steadfast type. Through all the kingdoms of organized life, the eternal unity, nature is a mutable cloud which is always and never the same. She casts the same thoughts into troops of forms as a poet makes 20 fables with one moral. Through the bruteness and toughness of matter, a subtle spirit bends all things to its own will. The adamant streams into soft, precise form before it. And whilst I look at it, its outline and texture are changed again. Nothing is so fleeting as form, yet never does it quite deny itself. A man we still trace, remains of or hints of all that we esteem badges of servitude in the lower races. Yet in him they enhance his nobleness and grace. As Io in Aeschylus, transformed to a cow, offends the imagination. But how changed when, in Isis in Egypt, she meets Osiris Job, a beautiful woman, with nothing of the metamorphosis left but the lunar horns as a splendid ornament of her brows. I shall finish at this point today. We're on page 129. Thank you so much for watching. Please do share your feedback, your thoughts, your comments. It is much appreciated. Please subscribe if you haven't already. What do you think of what I've read? What do you think about the different ideas I'm sharing? What's your thoughts? I look forward to hearing. I look forward to your amazing comments, feedback, and subscribe, please, if you haven't already. Have a beautiful day. Keep on shining your beautiful light on this world. You are amazing. You are beautiful. And you are precious. I love you. Have a lovely day. Take care.